So you got your CNC all set up, you figured out which way was X, Y, Z, you looked at the proper terminology, and now you're trying to figure out which projects you'd like to build. Well, that's the purpose of today's video. We're going to take a look at some of my most profitable, most unique, and most popular projects that I've ever created. I'm going to tell you how to build them, how I price them, and how you can actually sell them to take your hobby to the next level and actually make some money with it. We're going to start with the simplest project, and then we're going to build up in complexity until we get to my biggest seller ever. So let's dive right in. Today I'm going to show you how I put $15 worth of material into a project that sells for $150 or more. It's a simple wine caddy that can easily be used for picnics or out on the beach. Now, these particular types of caddies sell online for $150 to $200 each. However, it only takes about $15 worth of material, and that includes some pretty nice hardwood like maple and walnut. All right, so I failed to record the first part, but all I've done here is done a simple glue up with about 9 inches of spalted maple there in the middle and 3 inches on the front and back of black walnut. I think it just gives it a neat look. I'm sanding it to 120 grit right now, and then we will raise the grain by just simply wiping it down. It also cleans off any kind of leftover sawdust. Then we'll let that dry and then sand to a 220. That gives it a nice buttery smooth finish. Once we have the bottom tray finished, now it's time to make the top part. So I'm going to cut that down to size, about 26 inches, using my miter saw. Then I'm going to take it over to the planer, trim it down to about 3/4 of an inch. Now, you do see a lot of dust flying out. It was just clogged up at this point. You'll see that later on I actually clean it out. And now we're going to use the table saw to cut this down to about 5 inches deep. And then I'm also going to do a glue up with another piece of walnut to give a similar look up there. Now, I don't have a jointer, so to get a nice clean edge for jointing for doing my glue up, I'm just using my CNC. Again, you don't have to have a CNC for this type of a project, but since I have one, I'm going to use it. And you'll notice it gives a great joint right there. Both of those sides were done with a CNC, and that's about perfect. From there, let's do a simple glue up. You know what that looks like, so I won't waste a lot of time. What I will do is mention that I like to use wax paper on my pipe clamps when I'm doing a glue up. That helps to limit the amount of glue that gets on the clamps, and then also the cauls themselves, which makes it easier to get those cauls off with the minimum amount of sanding. Clamp everything up nice and tight, let it dry overnight. Then we take everything apart and revel at our greatness. Now, there's a little bit of dried glue on there. I keep a hand plane blade handy so that I can use that. I found that's just as good of a way to get rid of those little glue drops as anything. Then I am going to take it back over to my planer, and I'm going to give it a couple finishing passes just to clean that up slightly. And you'll notice sawdust was cleaned out. From there, we'll sand it down to a 220, just as we did before. I won't go through that process again, but that's what we do. Now, once we have those pieces, you do not have to use a CNC to do this, but since I have one, I'm going to. You can easily use a circle cutting jig or any other method that you want. All you have to do is be able to cut a couple of circles out. The diameter of those circles are going to vary depending on the size bottles you have. Then we also need to cut out the tracks for the glasses to sit in. And then once we have that done, I'm just going to use a palm router. It ends up being just as quick as a CNC to get this part done. So that's going to give a nice little rounded edge there. And then once again, you don't have to have a CNC. You can easily use a jigsaw or any other kind of saw to cut these out. Or a drill press, but I like to have just a little pocket there and not cut all the way through. So I'm using a 3/4 inch bowl bit so that I can have those handles there, but still have the top side maximum surface for a serving area. All right, I've got a couple of dowels. I'm going to put these in at about 9 inches. The height will vary depending on the size glasses that you want it to work for. But for me, 9 inches was a good height. Now, when you glue these together, make sure that they are at a 90-degree angle. The last thing you'd like to see is for them to be really wonky and your top tray tilted one way or the other. You also have the opportunity, if you don't want to glue them up, you can screw them in so that you can take it apart. But I like the idea of it staying nice and sturdy. Once we have everything together, I'm going to apply some Odie's oil here. I love Odie's oil for this type of project. It's my preferred finish. In hindsight, the next time I do this, I will apply the Odie's before I assemble everything because that made it a little bit more difficult. And there you go. That walnut and spalted maple sure is beautiful. And then now finally, we're going to put some little simple rubber feet on there. If you'd like to pick any of these up, again, there is a link also down in the description for you. And here we go. It's nice and finished. Looks pretty. You see the hand grips underneath. And hopefully my friend's baby mama will love it. Now, there's nothing that I enjoy more than coming in my wood shop and creating new, unique projects that grab attention, satisfy me creatively, and make money. And that's what we're going to do today. I'm going to show you how to use your CNC of choice to create this beautiful jewelry box, and I'm going to walk you through the step-by-step process. Not only that, I'm going to tell you exactly what feeds and speeds I would use, and if you stick around to the end, I'm going to talk about how long it takes and how much I would sell this for. All right, to begin with, we need to prep our wood. I'm going to use a piece of walnut. This is approximately 7.5 inches wide and 21 inches long. Now, you can adjust it however you want to, but for the size that I'm creating it, that's what I'll need. From there, I'll use this master segue and move right over to my planer. I like to keep my miter saw and my planer in the same part of the shop because I do go from one place to another very often. Already a flat board. I'm just going to trim it down and get it slightly under 1 inch. I'm going to cut it at about 0.96 inches thick. And the planer is also going to clean it up a little bit. Now, let's move to the CNC. We are going to use a 3/4 inch bowl bit. I'm going to run it at 16,000 RPM per minute, spindle speed, 1/8 of an inch depth per pass, a 0.2 inch step over, and 42 inches per minute. I found that with this particular project, that speed actually works really well. Now, my CNC of choice is the Onefinity Woodworker X50. I've actually already ordered the upgraded model, and it should be arriving here within the next couple of weeks, I hope. And for my choice of spindles, this is a Pone CNC spindle system with a variable frequency drive, and I love it. I made this upgrade a few months ago, and if you're interested in any more information about the spindle or the CNC, I'll put links to reviews down in the description. Now, you can design your own jewelry box using VCarve Pro, Fusion 360, Easel, any type of software like that. But if you're the type that would just like to download it and have it, I will put a link to the design files down in the description below. Now, normally I would have my dust collection on there, but the first time running this project, I wanted to make sure I could keep an eye on it. And with that dust shroud on there, it's hard to see what's actually going on. So as you'll see, this generates a lot of chips. Once we're finished here, I'll move on to the 1/4 inch end mill. Now, all you need to do right here is probe your Z-axis because the X and Y should still be consistent. Now, this is a 1/4 inch end mill. I'm using 18,000 RPM spindle speed, 1/8 of an inch depth per pass, 1/8 of an inch step over, and I'm running it at 60 inches per minute. From there, we'll just let that cut out. It's not a sexy process, so I'll just jump right past that, and you'll see the finished process. Now, the last thing you always want to do is cut out your profile. That limits the possibility that the work can actually shift and move on your spoil board. Next, we move to a dry fit to see how everything fits together. The holes are a little bit too small for the dowel. I'm using a 1/2 inch dowel, and those dowels are notoriously not exactly 1/2 inch. Not a big deal. I'll just simply use a little paste wax. And when the paste wax doesn't give me the result that I want, then I'll just move over to my sander and I'll sand off a little bit of the thickness of this dowel. And that does the trick. Makes it much easier. Now in the future, I might make those pockets a little bit bigger so that I don't have to do this step, but it's not a big deal. Then let's move over to a final sanding. I'm going to sand it at 120 and then again at 220. Now I like to sand these pieces stacked together. That way you can make sure that any kind of imperfections, if you press too much, are at least going to be consistent. But take your time with it and you'll get a nice contour and a gorgeous finish. From there, I'm just using mineral oil to finish this. I love the look of mineral oil on walnut. It really brings out that color. Next step is just to let it dry. And from there, let's move on to final assembly. Now, you want to glue the dowel into the bottom piece, but you really want the other three pieces not to be glued so that each section can spin freely. Now, other options could be to engrave the top, to put some type of design on the top with a laser engraver or your CNC. You can also put felt or fabric inside each of those pockets. And obviously, you can use any type of wood you like. Now, one change that I did make, I didn't pay attention, and it turns out that the bottom side is actually looks a little bit better than the top. The top's got some imperfections. So I flip it over, but in order to get it to work, I've got to drill all the way through. Not a big deal. I'll pay better attention next time, but actually having that dowel sticking out on the end is a neat little accent. And from there, we have a gorgeous little jewelry box. Now, how much would I sell this project for? This project takes approximately 45 minutes on the CNC, and then once it comes off, all it requires is a little bit of sanding and finishing with some mineral oil. In terms of materials, it takes just over 1 board foot of wood. So depending on the type of wood that you use, you're talking anywhere between $5 and $10 worth of material. I think you can easily sell this for $50 to $60, possibly more in your area. And in addition, at no added cost, I would include personal engraving. Those engravings always do a great job on sealing the deal. They make the project more personal to the buyer, and it doesn't take long at all. Hey folks, Damien from Southpaw Designs. I'm always on the lookout for creating new types of projects that are going to grab my customers' attention, that are going to be easy to create, and that are going to lead to increased sales. So if that's something that you're interested in, just watch on, because we're going to create a really cool project that you can create with or without a CNC machine. So let's go ahead and dig right in. To begin with, you'll notice that this piece of walnut that I'm going to use is pretty warped. Instead of taking it to the jointer and planer, I'm just going to screw it down to my CNC and use a surfacing bit to give me a flat surface. Then I'll take it over to the planer and then plane it down to what I need. Now, if you're ever using this method, make sure that you countersink those screws down pretty deep, because if your surfacing bit runs over those screws, it's going to cause some problems. I'm going to use a shim to hold up that edge so that it will surface it to a nice flat surface, and then we just let it run. Now you'll notice right here, I may need to adjust my feeds and speeds, because every time that surfacing bit stops in a corner, it's leaving a little burn mark. I can plane that off, and I will, but I want to eliminate that. From there, since I have one flat surface, I'll move over to my planer, and I'll just plane the other side to get it down to the thickness that I want. And we will now cut it down to size. Now, this maple that I have is plenty flat enough. There are no warps in it, but I still need to plane it down to the same thickness as my walnut. And then let's bring it over to the assembly table and figure out which direction I like best. Now, this walnut does have a little bit of some knot holes in it that I'm going to have to use some epoxy to fill up. I'll do that later on. Form a simple glue up. And Under my culls, I like to put a little bit of wax paper in case there's any glue that gets stuck to those culls. When I take them off, it's possible that some of the wood could actually stick to my board. And while you can break it off and sand it down, I prefer to not deal with that anyway. All right, we've used the magic of video to dry everything off, let's take it off. And that wax paper did a good job of keeping the glue from adhering the culls. And now we're going to take it over to our CNC and make our pocket. Now you're going to see that there is a big mistake that I make here. Best I can figure is I didn't tighten my bowl bit down enough into the collet, and all of a sudden things kind of go awry. And there you have it. The bit slipped, it dropped, and ruined this piece of wood. That just sucks, but you live and learn. Thankfully, I didn't break the bit and I didn't damage the CNC, but this section of wood is pretty much useless. Instead of scrapping the entire piece, I'm going to take it back over to the table saw and I'm going to cut that walnut off and try to reuse that. Now, I'm not going to go through the entire process again showing you a glue up, but I just grab a new piece of maple for the middle and re-glue everything and then let that dry. All right, once the new glue up is dried, let's try this again. I'm going to slow down the speed on my bowl bit, and I'm also taking off the dust protection so you can see it. Now, I like to do two passes here. The first one is going to be a rough pass. It's going to get rid of the most material. I'm going at about a 40% step over. So it's going to remove a decent amount of material pretty quickly, but you'll notice that it gives a lot of those little ridges on there that we're going to need to get rid of later on. Okay, once we're finished, we're going to do the same thing again, except we're going to turn our step over down to about 10%. So it's going to give a nice smooth finish, as you can see right there. It's going to get rid of all those ridges. And we can go a little bit faster because we're only going about an extra 0.01 inches. From there, switch over to a 1/4 inch bit. My downcut bit is pretty rough right now. I've got to order a new one, so I'm just using an upcut. No problem, I can just sand that off. And this is going to be the hole that the dowel is going to fit into. And then the final step of cutting this out is actually going to create the profile. I always like to do that profile last. So when the bowl is doing its cutting, it's going to have the maximum amount of hold. So there's very little chance of anything breaking loose. If you were to do your profile first, then you run into a higher likelihood of your workpiece breaking off. Also, right now, I'd like to take just a moment to ask you if you're getting anything useful out of this. Please hit that like button down there and leave a comment. Those metrics tell YouTube that this is valuable and encourages them to share it out to a broader base. And if you haven't already done so, please subscribe. I'm trying to build this channel, and those interactions really help out. So let's go ahead and get back to it. Then we'll start cutting our circles. And we're going to have several little rings that are going to go around the dowel, both to hold the trays in place and then also with little separators to keep the trays from dropping down onto our charcuterie board. I'm going to make a total of 4 of them, 2 in walnut, and then I'm going to make 2 more in maple, but I won't show you that because you get the idea. And then we move to our last cutout, which are going to be our trays. Now, this is simply a shape. You can customize this shape however you like, but you need to have a pocket for your bowls. And now, I'm not going to try to do a pocket. I'm just doing the inner profile because to try to bore out that entire pocket would take forever. When it comes to the smaller hole, however, I would recommend that you actually use a pocket to get rid of everything. And you'll see why here in just a minute. There are 2 reasons for that. One, when I'm cutting out those interior profiles, there's such a small piece of wood that's left over that it tends to break off, and that could potentially damage your project. Two, because of the fact that I like to leave tabs in there, those tabs are stuck and they're a pain to get rid of in a hole that small. So I just recommend using the extra 2 or 3 minutes that it takes just to pocket out that small hole, so you don't have to go back in and get rid of all that and then risk having those small pieces break loose. Now we'll come over to the sander and clean up those edges, and especially get rid of the tabs. Now for the larger pocket, I'm just going to use the spindle sander to get rid of that interior. This is what I was talking about. To try to do this on the small pocket that's going to fit over the dowel is just incredibly difficult to do. And in the time that it would take to just pocket out, bore out that entire hole, it's going to save you a lot of hassle. So that's the way I recommend you do that. And this is exactly what I'm talking about. Trying to clean off the little bit of those tabs is such a pain, it's really not worth it. It would have been quicker just to pocket out that entire hole and then move on. Once we have all the pieces cut and sanded, let's do a little dry fit. One thing I forgot to record is that bottom ring right there. I actually put a dowel into the larger dowel to hold that in place. From there, I'm just going to use some mineral oil this time. I use Odie's oils quite a bit, but I decided to use mineral oil this time just to see what it would look like and be a little bit different. And the mineral oil turned out really nice, but I think I am going to go back to the Odie's oil for these types of things. I just like Odie's oil. I'm not paid by Odie's at all. I just like it. Set everything out to dry. And then let's take some mineral oil to our board itself. Actually going to do 2 coats of this, and then let's move on to assembling everything together. We put each of our trays in, separated by one of our little walnut separators, and then we'll put the last ring on top. Now, you'll notice that it's a little bit wobbly. I can cut down the size of the hole into the board just a little bit, but I want it to be loose enough that it will fit down inside there with a little friction fit. The top, however, I didn't like the fact that it was wobbly, so I decided to glue that on, that top ring. So it actually holds all of the trays in place. And instead of using wood glue, I just decided to use some CA glue, because that will lessen the likelihood that it will drip down onto the tray and glue those in place. And once we're finished, here we go. There are some improvements that could be made, but overall, I think this is a great project. Hey folks, Damien from Southpaw Designs, and today we're going to get what my students tell me is fancy AF. They won't tell me what fancy AF really means, but I'm pretty sure it means something like fancy and fun or something like that. So anyway, today we are going to build this wine caddy with a mini charcuterie board actually added to it. This actually turned out to be an incredibly easy project to make on my Onefinity CNC, and I'm going to walk you through how to do that. Now, the only bits that we're going to need are a 1/4 inch, this is a downcut bit, 1/4 inch upcut bit, and a bowl bit. Now, I'll put links to all 3 of these bits down in the description if you need them. We're also going to use a roundover bit, but that's optional. Now, this particular piece is made out of spalted maple, as well as walnut for the charcuterie tray. It holds 2 wine glasses here and here, as well as a wine bottle on the inside, as you saw on the thumbnail. This is actually a poplar dowel, which I really don't like poplar, and I'm probably going to swap that out. I'm going to find some oak dowels to use instead, because poplar has kind of this green to gray tint to it, and I really don't like it. But this is really just my first one. It's the one that I'm building for myself and for my wife. So I'm fine with that for now. I might replace that later on. So let's get rolling here. I've already planed my material. This is some spalted maple that I got from a local sawmill. And I am going to cut the underside. This is actually the handle that is on each side of the wine caddy, and I'm using the bowl bit to accomplish this. It's not going to go all the way through, and as you see, this is actually the underside. So if you notice that rough edge, that's because this is an upcut bit. Now you might say, why am I using an upcut bit? Well, let me remind you. That's because this is the underside. So I'll just sand it off later on. I don't have a compression bit. This will actually cause me a problem a little bit later that we have to remember when we're designing this. Now, let's move on to the actual charcuterie tray. I'm also using this bowl bit. This is a really handy bit to have in your arsenal. I like having this bit quite a bit. It's a 3/4 inch bowl bit, and I'll put a link down in the description if you're interested in it. Now, these are going to be about 0.4 inches deep, so they're deep enough to hold a little bit of cheese, olives, maybe some meats or something like that. I'm going to take a rough pass, and then I'm going to take one final pass that's going to be 0.02 inches. That's going to be much more smooth. It's going to smooth everything out. We're going to cut out the center. This is where the wine is actually going to stick up through the middle. And for this, I'm just using my downcut end mill bit, and then we're going to cut it out. One thing I like about doing projects like this is it's great to be able to create things that are just unique to look at. It's a simple project, a wine caddy, but it's a new way of doing it, and it's something that your customers don't see all the time. So it's a great way to grab attention for your products. Hey, and since you're here, go ahead and hit that subscribe button if you haven't done it so far. I love putting out new project ideas, new project videos, and that's the only way that you're going to stay up to date whenever I put out something new. So hit that subscribe button. So now, once we've taken it to the sander, we've sanded everything off. I didn't show you making the bottom base piece. That is simply just 8 inches by 5 inches. And these are some dowels that I got in my local home center. They are poplar, which I really don't like, but this is just my first version of this. I just want to make sure that it works. It's more of a proof of concept, and I'll put it on my kitchen counter for my wife. Poplar ends up turning a bit green or grayish, and that really doesn't match up with the walnut and the maple that I'm trying to use. So I'm going to get some maple dowels instead. So let's make sure that those are perfectly upright. Now, I've got these files available for download. If you look down in the link in the description, if you're interested in picking those up. And here's where I realized that I screwed up. Because I cut the top upside down so that I could put the handles in there, I didn't think about the fact that I needed to reverse the charcuterie board. So, go back to VCarve Pro, reverse it, come back and cut it again. Now, it's not a big deal. The one that I've already cut, I can always make a reverse version of the wine caddy and still use that, which is what I'll do for the next one. All right, I'm going to use my trim router to give it some nice rounded edges. Now, you might say, why in the world didn't you just use your CNC? I do have a round over bit, but I kind of like doing things by hand. Do the same thing with the charcuterie tray. Just gives it a clean, smooth look because we have those rounded edges everywhere else. Now, if you're interested in videos like this, I do have a CNC projects playlist on my YouTube channel, which has several different types of projects similar to this. And I will link that playlist in the pinned comment and down in the description. So make sure to bookmark that and check that out. And there we go. Now, this is really all there is to it. This is actually a very simple build. Once you have it designed, designing it takes longer than building it. And once we have it together, let's just use the mallet to tap it in. That's really all there is to it. So now I'll just use a little mineral oil as a finish. Just going to hand rub that in. Really brings out some nice color, especially on that walnut. I love oiled up walnut. So beautiful. Now, this is fairly easy to create in VCarve Pro. It took a little while getting all the proportions right, making sure I had the sizes and the curves and everything matching up, and making sure I had the correct height, as well as the correct size for the slots for the glasses. But once I actually got it done, it's incredibly easy to create on your CNC. It only takes about 30 minutes on your CNC. Now, I would price this at $50, and I would include engraving. And you could either engrave inside the pocket of the charcuterie board, or you could probably more so engrave on either one of these areas right here. And I think that's a great added feature because it takes not a lot of time using either a laser or a CNC, and it personalizes it for your customers. In terms of materials, this is just over a board foot. Now, this part is a spalted maple, which in my area goes for about $4.50 a board foot. And this is about half of a board foot of walnut, which goes for about $8.50 in my area. So, as well as the dowels, which you can pick up for about $1 a piece. So I've got maybe about $12 in this project. And that's using high quality hardwoods. Now, in addition to just doing it like this, you can also use ramekins kind of like this. These are the same size ramekins that I use in my multi-level charcuterie board video, which I'll link below. But you can drop those in there. So once you take your wine bottle out, or once you take your charcuterie tray off and set it to the side, you could always put a dip or olives or something else in there. This is my 3-ring Perpetual calendar clock, and it's caused some problems. And we're going to fix that today. Now, this design has been one of my most popular designs. I've sold over 100 copies of the design files on my website, and I've made several of them locally. But there's been one problem. Because of the fact that I primarily sell locally, and the fact that this project is too fragile to really ship, I've had a hard time selling as many of these as I'd like to. The price tag for one of these goes from $200 to $250, depending on the type of wood and other options available. And considering that this type of a project has been most popular as a gift, it's a little bit more than a lot of people in my area want to spend. So my solution has automatically started making me money. It's a 2-ring version of that exact same clock. And as soon as I posted it out on my personal Facebook page, I immediately started getting likes, loves, and most importantly, orders. It takes less material, is much faster to build, and can be sold at approximately $100 less, which puts it perfectly within my customer's budget and is a nice complement to the 3-ring version. So if you want to see how to build this, as well as how to position it into your business to increase sales and get you noticed, then stick around. Now, let's head to the workshop. So to begin with, we are going to cut out our rings. I'm not going to go through the details, but I will talk about some of the key parts. Use a 1/4 inch upcut bit to cut my circles. And I use a 60-degree V-bit for all of the numbers and the months. Now, ignore that spot in the middle there. I was trying to do some flattening with a flattening bit, and it is seen better days. So I just stopped that and then tossed it. Now make sure you've got plenty of tabs on here because you don't want these coming loose. It will ruin the entire project. So now you'll notice I put plenty of tabs on there to hold that wood in place. Now I'm just going to use a reciprocating saw to cut these out. Cut off as much of that tab as possible so that it's easier to sand down. And I definitely need to replace this blade. It's seen better days. And what do you do with that leftover centerpiece? Guess what? That can just be another clock. From there, let's come over to the spindle sander, clean off those tabs, and then give it a good sanding. Now, my sealant of choice is shellac. It's natural. It's quick drying, actually smells kind of nice. So I'm going to seal it up really well before I go to paint these numbers and months. All right, I'm just using some acrylic paint that I got from Hobby Lobby, and I prefer to paint these in here instead of using spray paint. I've used spray paint in the past. Spray paint tends to be a little thinner, so it's more likely to bleed even if you have a good seal.
But I found that with this acrylic paint that it's going to take a little longer, but the finished product is much better.
Hey, if you're interested in making this project on your own and you don't want to design it yourself, I do have the plans on my website. I'll put the links down below. I'll also put the links to the 3-ring version so you can pick up that if you'd like to, as well as a bundle if you'd like to get both of them together.
Now, once we let that dry, I'm going to use an 80 grit piece of sandpaper. Now I'm going to use an 80 grit piece of sandpaper to sand off that excess paint, and it's going to take off the majority of that shellac as well. I've toyed around with several ways to do it, and this actually ends up being the best way to do it.
Okay, now I want to point out one mistake that I made and something that you'll want to do a better job of than I have. If you notice right here, these numbers are thicker than these numbers right here. The big reason for that is because maybe I didn't do that good of a job of making sure this was flat when I did the glue up, and so there was a slight warp in it. And so these are going to end up being a little bit thicker. So you want to make sure that you have this as flat as possible. Now, it's still going to spin just fine. And what I'll do is I'll just take a little bit of sandpaper and I'll sand this down a little bit thinner, but it is something that you do want to try to prevent that as much as you can. So make sure that your wood is always the same thickness, and then when you glue it up, you use cauls so it's nice and flat and doesn't have any kind of hump in it.
All right, now that we have the rings done, let's start making our clock. Now I chose this specific piece of spalted maple for a reason. I love that spalting right there in the center, and that's actually going to be up at the top where you actually see the rings. Forgive the hair that's on my shirt. I've got lots of animals. You know what a glue up looks like, but for the sake of a cool little shot, we'll do a quick little glue up.
Hey, now one of these pads fell off. If you see it, pick it up for me, all right? Okay, so we got a piece of spalted maple right here, and I thought this spalting right here would be cool for the top of the clock where you're actually going to see the date and the month stick through right there, and then the engraving, which I'm going to do with my laser engraver, is going to show up down here. So let's screw this thing down and get rolling.
All right, now let's cut out our clock. So for this, I'm still using a 60-degree V-bit. Now, I did make one mistake here that I happened to catch in time. You should always do the back side of your clock first because the tabs are on the bottom, and you'll see why that matters here in just a minute. But I'm doing the front side here. Those are the pockets where you'll see the month and day, and now I'm actually cutting the outline. Everything looks fine so far, and everything is fine. But then when I flip it over to do the backside and I cut out the tracks, you'll notice that I actually cut off the portion where my tabs are. So I've actually cut my tabs off, which means that there's going to be nothing holding this down. Thankfully, I catch it at the last minute, and I don't ruin the job. Now from here, I did the same thing with painting the letters as I showed you on the rings. I'm not going to show you that again. And just given the style of this engraving that needed to be on here, I decided to use a laser engraver instead. I'm not great with using a laser engraver, so I'm not going to brag about that, but I got the job done. Now from here, these are the top and bottom parts. From previous versions of this project, I've actually added these on here, and they're part of the design files. You'll notice that the top piece actually has a slanted cut there, and that's done because I like to hang this on a wall with a French cleat. That French cleat makes it real easy to just mount anywhere very quickly and easily. Now you want to make sure not to have too much excess glue when you're gluing these two back pieces on there, because if the glue does drip onto the rings, you could actually glue your rings to your clock. From there, let's go ahead and assemble, put our two back pieces in place to frame everything up. And I don't want to move this, so I'm just going to put a couple of kettlebells on top of there, and I'm just going to use pressure to hold these pieces in place and to finish this glue up. Next, we'll add the clock mechanism. I'll put a link to the clock mechanism that I use down in the description if you need to pick some of those up. And finally, let's mount it to the wall. I prefer to use a French cleat, and so I'm just going to mount the cleat back onto the wall right here. And then our clock hangs quick and easy.
Okay, so now why is it so important to have both versions in your portfolio? Here's why. The 3-ring version is an attention getter. People love it. But once they see it and they ask the price tag and I have to tell them that it's $200 to $250, that turns a lot of folks off. These are great gift ideas, but they tend to be outside of the price range for a lot of my customers, at least as a gift. But once you've grabbed their attention with a 3-ring version, if they say, it's a little out of my price range, and you can say, well, as a matter of fact, I've got a slightly smaller version. It's only 2 rings, but it's the exact same design for almost half that price. I've found that this version is actually an even better seller locally than the 3-ring version is because it brings a great gift idea within the price range of many of my customers. So the 3-ring version grabs their attention, and the 2-ring version oftentimes makes the sale. Well, thanks for watching till the end, because watching till the end and then watching another video, which you're going to see right here, is actually the best way to support this channel. It shows YouTube that the content that I'm creating is engaging and that you want to keep on watching it. So check out this video, which is the 3-ring version that I put out a little while ago, and you can see both of them together. Hey, thanks for sticking around till the end. Since you're still here, make sure to take a look at this video right here, which is a review of my Pone CNC spindle upgrade that I upgraded to just last year.